So, Andy, let's pretend that I'm a person doing youth ministry in a church or in some other context, and I just listen to your lecture. So I'm in a setting where we haven't made the shift from the thing to the story, as you talked about, but I'm on board with the idea. Where would I start in going about changing that culture? And that's a pretty big shift. It's not a technical change; it's an adaptive change. So how would I do that?
Yeah, this is going to actually sound a little bit too technocratic for my own taste. But I think you start quite slowly. But you start by almost doing a story inventory on your community. And so you start by having, I think, a disposition within yourself that you're interested in people's stories, that you're not in such a rush to build something or do something that you don't have time for people's stories. And then you just take account of them. Because I think one of the things that happens when you're a pastor or a minister in a church is you get these bleeding out moments of a deep narrative. And I think part of our job in the context of ministry is to follow that in a very respectful way, maybe, but to say, let's have coffee and talk about that. There's something there that I want to hear. And I think too often when our own highest good is like we have to get more kids coming, or we just have to we have to compete with a huge mega church across town, or whatever that might be, or I need a podcast that everyone's listening to or something, that we just don't have time for the slow burn, the slow leaking out of those narratives. So I think that it's really a counterintuitive practical step, which the practical step for the youth worker is to turn their attention more to the adults or the non-youth in the congregation to hear those stories. It doesn't mean you aren't listening for those stories with young people, but I think part of what I'm trying to push forward is what would it mean to not see ourselves as resource depleted, but to see ourselves as actually having something really essential to offer to young people, which is the narratives of these people who are in faith and doubt and faith-seeking understanding, still around. As we talked about other big transitions, like these people are still around. There's a story there in and of itself that's very interesting. Yeah. That one, we might look back in 100 years and say the 200 years and say the big problem, the big missed opportunity was that we kept on looking around saying who's not here and not realizing there are people here that, particularly in this kind of secular age that I've described following Charles Taylor, don't need to be, and there's reason for them not to be, but they're still there. They still have some kind of open take. They still have some kind of experience. They have still some kind of sense that there's something beckoning to them and calling to them. And we've been more concerned about those who aren't there instead of saying, you're still here. Yeah. Why? Yeah. What is it? And those people actually don't get the gift of being able to articulate that. Yeah. So I think the first practical step is maybe that's it, is just to show up in the adults, the lives of some 65-year-old women's Bible study and say to them, so I got a question for you. Why are you still here? Yeah. Or maybe to the 45-year-old dad and say, why are you still here? Like, what is this? What's going on here that leads you back to this? Sure. And that's an incredible, talk about intergenerational mystery. It's an incredible intergenerational thing because you're now inviting this 45-year-old or 65-year-old person to narrate their own experience, which gets them in touch with this, which helps them see the way God has been active and hidden in their lives, but then to say, will you share that with our young people?
It can be a mentorship model then, where they are tending to the lives of these young people by bearing witness to what God has done in their lives, and they've had a little more time to process that and experience different things. So being able to share that in the lives of young people.
I'm just not convinced that if we can just shine up the thing of youth ministry and maybe make a case to parents that it does provide more resources for some future than they can perceive now, that will really get us to faithfully be where we need to be. Yeah. I think the confession of people, and I think confession's big. I think practically thinking about confession as a major movement, and that does mean like confession of sin and confession of our ignoring of young people. Maybe is a confession we make, but also just the confession of why you still find this captivating. Why you still find it necessary to hear the word preached. Why you find it necessary to take the Eucharist? Why is that still important? Because the cultural hanger-on is kind of falling away.
Yeah.
Or if people need to confess that, that might be quite a beautiful thing too.
Sure.
It's risky though, because they might realize, yeah, why do I need to be here?
Existential.
I actually hate it here. That may happen too, and I think
Sure.
that's one of the reasons that keeps us from actually doing it.
That's interesting.
Because we're don't want to enter any more signs of decline.
Yeah.
But maybe the only way forward is to not be afraid of the decline,
Yeah.
and to ask people to really reflect on where's the living God? How do we participate in the living God? I'm just really captivated by the theological movement that happened in the early 20th century that led to so much fodder in Europe, particularly, that continues to inspire me. But it really started with remembering that God is God.
Mm.
So how would our first practical step in youth ministry be remember that God is God?
Yeah.
And so asking people to talk about how God is still God in their
Yeah.
lives, or maybe not.
Yeah.
But having young people be kind of bathed in the stories of people wrestling with, is God still God?
Yeah.
And what would that mean?
And that makes sense with confession too, because really confession is having eyes to see a very honest reflection of who we are in our core, right? And being able to say God is God and I am not, right? And being really genuine about that with young people. Young folks, I think, can smell a phony from a mile away. They can. But if you're being authentic with them about who you are and how much God, in God's self, loves all of us, that's captivating. That's a story. That's not a thing. Yeah.